And we also don't know, whether God's going to offer many opportunities. It's highly likely God will, but over maybe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, God may offer opportunities, cycles of opportunities to receive God's love in order to become transformed.
Okay, so now we're jumping ahead. Let's just talk about this opportunity that God has given us to receive her love.
Sure.
So that, again, you've stated very clearly, this is an opportunity. It's not something that's assured.
Yes.
And remembering
and
that...
it's a gift. We can't expect it.
Yes. And remembering that this message is really you starting to talk to Paget about how to receive divine love. This is immediately telling us something, isn't it? That it's an opportunity and it's not something that's assured or enforced. So that tells us that our desire and the use of our will is one of the most, logically speaking.
Not so much the use. If we define will and desire as we defined it in the third assistance group, it's primarily our desire, faith, and of course the reception of Holy Spirit about and truth about humility. Really, it's our faith and humility that are going to determine how much of it we receive.
Okay, but I just wanted to highlight that because you've introduced that now as a part of, we'll talk a lot more about it in the next message.
That's right. That's right.
So let's now get on to this later part where you say that the economy of God's plan for forming of his kingdom at some time, an unknown time, that the privilege of partaking of his divine nature, which is God's love, and the certainty of immortality will be withdrawn.
Yes.
It's not a question mark. It will happen.
Yes.
So could you please explain why the withdrawal of the opportunity to receive God's love is a part of the economy of God's plan in the forming of his kingdom?
Yes. So this is about the economy principles.
Yes.
And the reality is God does not do anything unless, there's going to be a purpose to doing something.
Yeah.
So God does not offer God's love to people who do not want it. God only gives God's love to people who do want it.
So can I clarify? I understand God doesn't give her love.
It's an economic thing, isn't it?
Yes.
It's pointless trying to give something to somebody who doesn't want to take it.
Yes. But you were saying it's not even on offer. If I'm sitting here going, I don't want God's love, it's not on offer?
Well, no, there's a period of time now where it is on offer to those even who don't want it. But after a while, to assist the people who did want it to continue to grow thereafter, there has to at some point be separations. The reason why, there's a number of reasons why, all to do with love, of course.
Yeah.
If you imagine you're one of the persons who has received God's love, one of the very first things that you want to do is share the opportunity to receive God's love with other people.
Yeah.
You can't give them God's love because God's love is a direct thing that comes from God, but you can help them open up to the concept that it is available, educate them and so forth about how that's available and help them to actually desire it. You can do that. Now, the problem is, if you can call it a problem, is you spend so much time doing that that you've also got to continue your own growth. Now, at some point in time, your own growth is going to get so far ahead of the people that you're trying to assist to grow that now you can't even communicate with them anymore.
Yep.
Your methods of communication are different.
Oh, and just as you were
the way
talking
you
about
live
with
is
the
different.
senses.
The senses are different. The brightness is completely different. You get to the point where you're so well developed that it's not that you can't communicate, because you can still communicate. They can't receive your communications anymore.
Even though you can dampen your condition, and
even though you can do all of those things. But remember, every time you dampen your condition, you're no longer being the person you are. You're now being a person for them.
So, and this is, keep going.
Right. So now love is asks me to do all of these kind of things to help that person out. But how long do you help a person who doesn't want help? Now, interestingly, God has limits on how long you help a person who doesn't want help. And when I say God has limits, what I mean by that is God does not give her love to a person who does not want it. Specifically does not want it.
Yeah.
God will attempt to help a person who has not yet decided
Yes.
to receive God's love through other means. But God cannot give love to a person or help a person who does not want help or does not want the love. Right? That's an exercise of your own desire, your own passion to not want it. It's an exercise of will to not want it. God cannot force it upon you. To force it upon you would be an unloving act. So God can't do that either. So now there is constraints placed upon a person who's developing. The person who's now developed in love and become in union with God, now in union with their soulmate, now an immortal state, and with their soulmate in an immortal state, in a union condition. Now that person is in a completely different universe. That's their primary function of existence. They are also in a completely different state. And they're also in a state that the person on earth or in a darker state is refusing to know anything about by choice, even though they know it's available. They're refusing to know everything about it. So what God's going to do, God's plan is this. God's plan is to educate everybody that God's love is available. That's the first part of his plan. That means everybody in the depths of the hell will understand that God's love's available, right the way through to any other condition will understand that God's love's available. But there will be people who still refuse it. Right? There's people right now in a highly developed intellectual state in the sixth sphere who are continuing to refuse it. And people will continue to make these kind of choices and decisions because they're able, they have free will, they're allowed to. Now, once everybody knows it's available and the majority of the people who know are still refusing it, and the others who are refusing it have made all this progress into these other states, what happens? What happens? There's no reason through the economy of God to give God's love or to even offer to people who are refusing it. Economy dictates that you don't even give it to somebody who's refusing it. Isn't it? That's what economy dictates. So that's what's going to end up happening. Economy will dictate that God no longer offers love to people who continue refusing it. At that point in time, those people no longer have the opportunity to receive God's love. And from that point in time, the opportunity exists to the other people who have to continue progression beyond their current state without having to be concerned with people who have refused to make that decision. In other words, their progression should be much faster and therefore much more experientially happy. So there's a lot of reasons why both love for the people who have received it and love for the people who have not would dictate this particular event occur.
Yes. So can I summarise? Highlight?
Yep.
So basically you're saying, and my feeling as well, is that obviously God's desire is that we each become as happy as we can be, and God has full knowledge that receiving her love is the way that we become most fully actualised in ourselves.
Yes.
And
in fact, we can't even become our normal self without receiving God's love, really.
And God's love for us is the infinite, and so God really desires that for us.
Yes.
So from what you've said, God wants everyone to know, firstly, that the opportunity exists to receive her love. And so the withdrawal would not occur before that has occurred.
Yes.
But two, God, in her infinite love for us, respects our desires and choices. And so will absolutely respect if we say, I know it's there, I know I have this possibility, but I am saying I do not want it.
Yes.
And
that's the main reason why the 14 have returned. Is to present this opportunity for everybody on earth and everybody in the spirit world to come to know that it's available.
And make
once
a decision
we have let everybody know that it's available, and everybody has an opportunity to know it's available, then our work is done.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Yep.
And as you said, once someone has received God's love, there is an immense amount of feeling that, wow, I would love for everyone to experience this.
Yep.
It's wonderful.
Yep.
And so naturally there's a, if we think of progression like a scale or going up a hill, we receive some of God's love and then we turn back and say, hey, I would love to help you.
Yes, you want to lift or help.
Yeah.
Or lift the others up into the same condition you're in, because obviously you're experiencing so much happiness and you can feel that they are not, and you would rather that they could if they wanted to, you know.
And so the way that I sort of see it at the moment is, at the moment, everyone, no matter where they are on the slope, once they've received some of God's love, they're looking down. They're looking down, and this I'm speaking metaphorically, but there's a part of their emphasis and attention on assisting other people to come up.
Which is a natural state of love to do that. But you can see also that it takes time and energy and resources that could otherwise be used in different pursuits.
Yes. Forward, because if we think about it like that, this like emphasis down the hill, if we reach a point where we say, look, everyone knows that the possibility is there, and there's certain people who say, look, I don't want to go up this particular hill, and then we turn our attention up, we don't even know the potentials of what might be created by looking up focusing all our attention on this upward progression.
And that's not to say that we haven't already looked up, because obviously we have to make the progression we've already made.
That's what I was speaking very simplistically and metaphorically.
And the reality also is that there is a lot of time and effort and resources being placed into helping people come to understand that the potential of receiving God's love exists. Yeah. And that, you would understand, is naturally the case. God would, of course, want everybody to know that the potential exists. Now, once this sort of closing of the potential occurs because of the fact that all the people have been offered and some have refused, and it might be, who knows, a lot that refuse. It's a separating process, really, of, you could call it sheep from goats, as I called it in the first century. But it's a separating process that occurs between those two potentials. So basically one group has the potential to become the perfect natural man, but that's the limit of their potential. And whether that potential includes immortality or not will not be known, and I'd suspect not. Based upon the fact that they haven't received a part of God in order for them to become immortal. The other potential is for the group of people that have received the potential and have engaged receiving God's love, and what happens to them. The sheep, if you call them that. Yeah. Those people, what will be offered to them in the future? What kind of growth will be offered to them beyond their current existence? Well, there's a lot of things potentially that could be offered to them that are dependent upon receiving God's love to understand and to conceive and also to know. Yeah. Go on, you were going to say.
Yeah, so I don't see it as sort of even one is better than the other. I see it...
Well, one is definitely better than the other.
But I mean in terms of worth and value.
Well, see, God still values the human. Like, he values... That's what I mean. He values the person, but the reality is the happiness potential of one far exceeds, in terms of exponentially, billions of times greater than the other. Yes. So naturally, one condition is better.
That's why it's going up. The hill is like happiness, joy, contentment, fulfillment. Like, we're further up the hill once we've received knowledge, God's
everything,
love. Yes. But it's like I've lost my inspiration. A division, and these creative potentials, as you said, of what might happen when everyone who has received some of God's love focuses on that.
All their potential.
On their potential.
Yeah. Focus all their effort on their potential. So at this stage, we've focused some of our effort on potential and some of our effort on helping others.
Yes.
And, there's a mixture of those things occurring.
Yeah, and what I was going to say was we are as yet unaware of the potentials that will be created for those people who have said, no, I don't want it, just through our focusing on potential and not on them anymore. Sorry,
I'm not getting what you're saying.
Yeah. I got embarrassed.
Say it again, and you'll get.
There's so many creative potentials that we are,
for whom,
yet unaware of, for the entire universe, that would result in a group of people who have received God's love, focusing entirely on fulfilling the potential that God has created within them.
Correct, yeah. But the potential may not exist for the people who have not received the love,
yes,
and probably won't.
Yeah.
And the reason why that is the case is that you need the love to understand the potentials. Without the love, you can't even understand the potentials. Yes, so that indicates, obviously, that the people who are in the sixth sphere state and remain in such, even though they have what they believe is happiness and a long life,
yep,
sooner or later, and in the case of some that have lived tens of thousands of years or longer, it's usually sooner rather than later, that they start feeling some level of dissatisfaction or discontent with that condition. Understanding that there must be future growth, but they're just not somehow engaging it.
Yeah.
And so even though the opportunity to receive God's love this time might be then closed off for a period of time, who knows that at some point in the future, maybe millennia time, tens of hundreds of thousands of years time, there may be groups of people who now do want God's love.
Yes.
Who understand that hundreds of thousands of years ago it was available.
Yes.
It'd be lovely if it was available again.
Yes.
And that then causes a whole series of events to occur that enables them to receive God's love at that time.
Similar to what happened with you 2,000 years ago.
Similar to what happened with me 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But it is a fairly unlikely occurrence, given the fact that they are already in a perfected... I just need to have a coffee. Yeah, so it's a fairly unlikely occurrence, given the fact that they're already in a purely, like a very intellectually developed state.
Yeah.
And they're already receiving all this knowledge and information that they're refusing.
Yeah.
It's a very unlikely state that they will feel discontent.
Yes.
About their state.
Yeah.
So while it may happen, possibility-wise, a reopening of the closed celestial spheres may happen in some point in the future.
Yeah.
It may, in fact, be many millions of years' time,
yes,
if at all.
Yeah.
Because of the condition of the people involved.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is important to understand that it's a very important time in human history to start. Not because we're threatened of dying. Because we're not. We're not threatened with dying. God doesn't say you're going to die if you don't do what I want. None of that.
Yeah.
But because the opportunity exists and it may not exist. And it may not exist quite soon. Depending on how many... As soon as everyone knows the opportunity exists, and at that point in time, the people who refuse have refused.
And they will no longer be offered the gift of receiving God's love. But those who have, clarification again, those who have received it, even in a small amount, will continue to have that opportunity.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Because I've already received it, it cannot be close to them. Because if they've already received it, even a small bit, it cannot be close to them after that point in time. If it was, it would be a sacrifice of God's own love.
Yes.
And that is not possible to occur. God can't do that. Yeah. So of course, those people who have received some, even if it's a tiny, minutest bit, and it only has to be one half of your soul too. So it could be one half of your soul has received a little bit, then it will still be open to you.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
It's a very loving thing.
Both halves of the soul must refuse it in order for the refusal to be complete
Interesting, hey? So this is a pretty hot topic, this one.
When you say a hot topic,
well,
it's a topic most people don't want to hear about.
It tends to invoke a lot of strong emotions in people.
Usually a lot of anger, isn't it? We find.
Yeah. So I wondered how deep you want to go in discussing it, because
I think there's other messages that discuss it in more detail, which we can certainly do.
Yeah.
The reality is I don't feel there's much of a need to discuss it in more detail. It's not a threat that God's putting upon people. It's an opportunity. And it's a gift. We've got to see God's love as a gift. It's not something that we can demand. It's not something... And this is where I see people who get angry. They really don't understand gifts.
No.
Because if they understood gifts, they're really like petulant children at Christmas time who think they deserve a gift. And they think that they should deserve the gift every year, no matter whether they break it or receive it or don't value it or not. They think they should still keep getting new gifts.
Yeah.
And that's not how God works. God gives gifts to people who appreciate them.
Yes.
And at some point we've got to understand that God's love is the most precious of all of God's gifts.
Yeah.
And at some point it's even more precious than life itself, because life itself will only ever attain to the sixth dimensional existence, whereas God's love helps you attain much higher conditions of love and therefore much higher conditions of happiness and joy. So it's much more precious than even life itself.
Yeah.
And so, it's very, very important for us to understand that gift.
Yeah. This idea of it being a gift.
Yeah.
And I think you've covered why it's loving that God would at some time withdraw the opportunity to receive.
Yeah, there's lots of reasons, obviously.
Yeah.
And if you consider all of the principles that we discussed about understanding God's laws, every one of these principles is engaged in this issue of the withdrawal of the opportunity, including principles such as transformation, redemption, and including other principles such as hierarchy, governance, responsibility in particular, and so forth. They're all truth and everything. You can't give more truth to a person who hasn't received God's love. To a certain point, they hit the truth. They hit a truth boundary, and that's it. That's all they can understand, really, and they can't understand anymore because God's love opens the parts of the soul that enables understanding of different types of truth that weren't available to you when you just had your intellect. So every single one of the principles is involved in this particular subject, and we need to understand it as a very important topic, really. And we need to get over our anger and rage and other feelings we have about God making my life difficult and threatening me or whatever it is that you feel. When really God's not threatening you. You still will live, or who knows, forever maybe. You just won't be immortal. And what immortal means is that you can never die. Nobody can ever remove you. So that's different than living forever.
Yes.
Which has still got potentially the possibility of being removed at some point.
And can you clarify, immortality as we're defining it here, is that having received God's love even just once, or is it having received God's love to the point of the eighth sphere at one with God?
Well, once we receive God's love just once, we have a part of God's love in us. So we're not immortal yet, in the sense we're not conscious of our immortality, because we still have a lot of fears and other emotions inside of us that we need to release in order to become conscious of our immortality. Once we release those fears and other problems that we face, addictions and fears that we place, we get to a state where we're now purified in God's love. We're now receiving God's love all the time. And once you get into that state, you are now fully conscious of your own immortality. So consciousness of immortality begins when you first receive God's love once, and ends, like when I say ends, it's completed when you now receive God's love all the time. You're at one with God. Now, in between those two states, obviously, is a state of growth. And a person may, at times, be conscious they're immortal during that phase, and other times feel the fears that they have still kicking in, and therefore, stopping their ability to be conscious of it. What we're saying, though, is that anybody who has received God's love can no longer die. Whether you're conscious of your immortality or not.
Yeah.
But the beauty of consciousness of immortality is you now have a fearless existence. Whereas if you're not conscious of immortality, you don't have a fearless existence.
Big
You've got to get rid of your fears
Yeah.
to have a fearless existence. And that's a part of the process of growth.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for clarifying.